I loved my father. I respected him. And that doesn't obviously take away from what he did. As a 7-year-old, I would have said he touched my parts.
Okay.
I was sexually assaulted.
They say drama makes for the best content, and right now there is probably no other place on earth where drama thrives quite like Hollywood.
He was controversial and he didn't like anybody to suggest.
Pretty much the drama center of the universe, Hollywood has always been a hotbed of both classic and unusual scandals. Many of these scandals tend to involve the celebrities who make up Hollywood, while others could even include regular folk like you and me. Regardless, one thing always holds true.
Was he capable of Marilyn Monroe or being complicit with it? That's a major allegation. It's shocking.
The moment a scandal is big enough, it will eventually come to light. And for some pieces of gossip, there really is no amount of gatekeeping that can be done.
Oh, yeah, you want to go?
In this video, we'll be going through some incredible pieces of drama that came out and became public consumption despite all the efforts made by the who's who of Hollywood to keep it under wraps.
I have a skin disorder that destroys the pigmentation of the skin. It's something that I cannot help. When people make up stories that I don't want to be who I am, it hurts me.
The many marriages of Charlie Chaplin. When you look at today's comedy scene, there are a lot of stars you could mention.
America, the birthplace of AIDS.
From the blockbuster machines like Kevin Hart and Adam Sandler to awesome stand-ups like Dave Chappelle and Bill Burr, we have a plethora of men and women who seem to find it pretty easy to make us laugh.
I am a woman. I'm a woman. Give it up for me. I'm a woman. I'm doing my best out here. Thank you. I'm awake. I'm trying. I'm doing my best. Why is your voice so deep, Uncle Leslie?
However, probably the first megastar comedian the world ever knew was a man named Charlie Chaplin. The British comic rose to stardom in the early 1900s thanks in most part to his mind-blowingly funny movies, many of which depicted him as being aloof and funnily silly. What really made Chaplin so famous was his ability to basically make you laugh even without saying a word. Chaplin pioneered silent films, essentially using his facial expressions and body language to make you laugh without uttering anything. And today, with a career that spanned well over 70 years, Chaplin is often considered one of the most important and influential figures in the history of the movie industry. That said, just like everyone else in Hollywood, Chaplin had a penchant for scandals. And the most notable of these actually revolves around his marriages. You see, just as his career progressed, Chaplin experienced a bit of a turbulent personal life. His first marriage came in 1918, with Chaplin marrying fellow actress Mildred Harris. The two met in 1918 when Chaplin was 29 and Harris was just 16. Still, they got married that year. It was later revealed that their marriage had actually been arranged by a film studio as a means of publicizing a movie they had done together. Interestingly, Harris also revealed that she was pregnant at this time, so Chaplin had to marry her just to cover up the whole controversy. However, it was soon found out that the pregnancy was false, although at this time the two were already wedded. The marriage between Chaplin and Harris ended up lasting only 2 years, with the two eventually divorcing on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. They did have a child in 1919, but he was born malformed and died just 3 years later. Anyways, Chaplin moved on following this first failed marriage. In 1924, he married Lita Grey, another actress. Like in the first marriage, the union between Chaplin and Lita was quite strange, as she was also 16 when they tied the knot. And, just like the first marriage, this one apparently got arranged because Lita was pregnant at the time. The revelation of Lita's pregnancy led many to accuse Chaplin of taking advantage of a minor. So the two got married to avoid any legal troubles. Still, the marriage wasn't a happy one, and by 1926, Lita left the family house with their 2 kids, and the couple split from there. Lita went on to release a book in which she levied some heavy accusations against Chaplin, including infidelity, abuse, and harboring perverted desires.
He was controversial and he didn't like anybody to suggest. I had suggested, and he didn't like the idea of me suggesting it.
At this point, Chaplin's carefully crafted image had begun to melt right before the public's eyes. Chaplin's next 2 marriages were more drama-free than the first 2. He married actress Paulette Goddard in 1936, and the two even co-starred in several films. While they tried to keep their union under wraps, the information eventually got out, and even though there wasn't much of a public spectacle, they decided to go their separate ways in 1942. A year later, Chaplin was back in the saddle, marrying Una O'Neill. This would be Chaplin's longest marriage, lasting until his death in 1977. Their marriage survived some pretty turbulent times, but it appeared that in Una, Chaplin finally found his partner. Well, I guess sometimes you have to try time and again before you find that perfect person for you.
I loved my father. I respected him. And that doesn't obviously take away from what he did. As a 7-year-old, I would have said he touched my
Okay.
I was
Woody Allen's weird father-daughter bonds.
And the Oscar goes to Woody Allen, Midnight in Paris.
If you think about it, movies would be nothing without the visionary minds of the directors behind them. These men and women take bare productions and bring them to life, infusing them with their brand of creativity and gravitas, and turning them into the spectacles we see on our screens. Back in the 80s, it was almost impossible to find any filmmaker who was as acclaimed and as talented as Woody Allen. Born in 1935, Haywood Allen is a filmmaker whose career spans well over 6 decades. He received several awards, including 4 Oscars, 10 BAFTAs, 2 Golden Globes, and even a Grammy. In fact, 2 of Woody's films have been inducted into the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. Creatively, this man was no joke. So, you might be asking, how come no one wants to work with Woody anymore? Well, it all kind of boils down to his personal life, and boy, there's a lot to be uncovered here.
For the first time in more than 25 years, Woody Allen's wife, Sue Previn, breaking her silence about their relationship. It's made headlines for years. And tonight, new allegations against her adoptive mother, Mia Farrow. And tonight, many of Farrow's other children are defending their mother.
You see, Woody got married to an actress named Mia Farrow in 1980. The couple had 3 kids together, Dylan and Moses, who were adopted, and 1 biological son, Ronan Farrow. However, Woody also had a few other children from previous relationships. In the early 90s, Woody's life came crashing down when Mia accused him of having inappropriate relations with their adopted daughter, Dylan, when she was just 7 years old. Woody consistently denied the allegations, claiming even publicly that there was no such thing that happened between him and his daughter.
On a total non-event. And when I say a total non-event, I mean a total non-event. It wasn't as if, I tickled my daughter or something and much has been exaggerated. I'm saying a total non-event.
Following 2 separate investigations into the matter, no charges were brought up against Allen. However, these allegations have continued to surface. Things got even saucier when it was revealed that Allen had also had a different relationship with another of his adoptive daughters, Sue Previn. Previn is the adopted daughter of Mia Farrow and Russian musician Andrei Previn. The couple adopted her in 1978 and brought her to America, but she mostly stayed with Mia after the latter's divorce from Andrei Previn. In 1992, Mia found photos of the 22-year-old Previn at Allen's home. Allen claimed he had taken the photos the day before, about 2 weeks after they first slept together. Due to this discovery, Mia eventually broke off her marriage to Allen for good. Want to know what makes this entire thing even weirder? Allen and Previn ended up getting married in 1997. I mean, dude, come on. If people are accusing you of having inappropriate relationships with the people in your immediate family, why on earth would you make things worse by getting married to one of them? Although the marriage to Previn was definitely not a good look, most people remain concerned about whether or not Allen had indeed engaged in an inappropriate manner with Dylan Farrow. And even though the investigations have mostly died down, Dylan has reiterated that Allen was indeed predatory towards her when she was a child.
And he sat behind me in the doorway, and as I played with the toy train, I was assaulted.
The entire circus surrounding the Allen Farrow family is honestly so complicated that detailing it all would probably require its own video. And as you can expect from a situation as serious as this, there have been a lot of differing opinions over the years as to who is telling the truth and who is fibbing. Still, it's pretty safe to say that the lives of everyone involved have been upended in the most tragic of ways. For Allen, his reputation has been forever blemished, and as much as the world recognizes him as a visionary filmmaker, no one would want to work with someone with such a checkered personal life. And for his children, the stigma of walking around with links to such a man can be so much to bear. Hollywood's first abused child star. If there's one thing we've come to know about Hollywood today, it's that the industry has a way of taking young and talented children, chewing them up, and spitting them back out when they're deemed to be of no use anymore. Over the years, we've seen and heard about different child stars who had to endure severe hardships just because they wanted to make it big in Hollywood. And for many of these former superstars, the fall from grace was just as swift as the rise to it. However, while you might think that the trend of child stars being mistreated in Hollywood is a new thing, trust me, this whole thing has been going on for quite a while.
Child stardom.
These kids are here basically for one reason, to make money.
Although a lot of people have indeed come out to speak about how badly children are treated in Hollywood, many believe that the first major case can be traced back to the early 30s, when a young, vibrant little girl named Judy Garland burst onto the scene. Born Frances Ethel Gum in June 1922, Judy was the OG child star. She was the child of two vaudevillians who had settled in Grand Rapids to run a movie theater that featured other vaudeville accounts. And as a little girl, she formed a vaudeville group known as the Gum Sisters with her two siblings. By the time Judy was just 11 years old, her talent had become undeniable. That year, she signed a management deal with MGM Studios after the studio boss, Louis B. Mayer, saw one of her performances. He knew she had talent, and he offered to sign her up right away without even bothering to take her through the standard screen test. Mayer wanted only Judy among everyone else, so he offered her father an ungodly amount of money. Lured by the promise of superstardom and fortune, Judy went along. And boy, would that prove to be a terrible decision. You see, at this point, MGM Studios pretty much treated Judy like she was their property. According to reports, she was put under 24-hour surveillance with a chaperone following her everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Even to the bathroom. Apparently, the studio didn't want Judy to fall into the wrong company, and by company, I mean they basically prohibited her from having any normal relationships or friends. At the same time, Judy was thrust into an unforgiving work schedule. MGM Studios prioritized long filming hours and grueling schedules, which became the norm for Judy. Merely thinking about how a 12-year-old could survive all this is enough to give you chills. But that was life for a young Hollywood superstar. To make things worse, Judy was doing all this while being completely unaware of how much money she or her movies made. All she survived on was what she was given by the studio, and this meant that the studio basically controlled every facet of her life. Still, this wasn't even the worst part. As it turned out, MGM Studios had a borderline draconian Weight Watch policy for Judy. They were incredibly meticulous about her weight, placing Judy on diet pills from the time she was just 12 years old. She wasn't allowed to have the normal stuff kids her age enjoyed, down to simple pleasures like burgers or even a sip of Coke. Even on her birthdays, she was never allowed to have cake. And even though she was a skinny, underfed, anorexic child, Mayer would make it a personal responsibility to constantly remind her of how fat she had gotten. If she wanted to rebel, she was threatened with immediate dismissal from the studio, so Judy naturally fell back in line. Eventually, though, things started to get to Judy. She fell into the throes of substance abuse and was said to have even tried to take her own life a few times. By 1949, MGM fired her from playing the titular character in Annie Get Your Turn, replacing her with Betty Hutton. She returned to show business after a brief hospitalization, but slotting back into work proved to be a bit of a challenge. By 1950, the ailing Judy was finally released from the studio. Still, despite being at a low point in both her life and career, Judy bounced back. She managed to land a few roles on stage plays in New York and London, and in 1954 she returned to the silver screen in the second iteration of A Star is Born. The movie was a smashing hit, earning Judy her first Oscar nomination. Judy would go on to star in several other critically acclaimed projects, earning her reputation as one of the greatest actresses of all time. However, for every case of a person like her who managed to bounce back from such a setback, we have 100 cases of child stars who were dumped by the Hollywood machine and never managed to make a comeback. And stories like these are just a stark reminder of the cruel nature of show business. Elvis and Priscilla's marriage. Elvis Presley was and remains one of the most influential and pivotal musical acts. Based purely on the number of certified album units sold in the United States, he ranks only behind the Beatles and Garth Brooks as the best-selling artist of all time. And his influence on modern pop culture across the board is widely regarded. I mean, come on, they don't call him the King for nothing. Still, as we've all come to find out, Elvis's personal life was quite interesting. Most critically, details surrounding his marriage to Priscilla Beaulieu have changed the way this icon has been seen in several ways. When Elvis and Priscilla met in 1959, he hadn't become the world-famous artist he ended up being. He was still a 26-year-old Army personnel, while she was just a 14-year-old in the 9th grade. Now, look, at this time, taking someone around the age of 17 or 18 to be your love interest wasn't considered overly weird. I mean, a lot of people would have raised an eyebrow, but society would still have just overlooked such a thing. A 14-year-old, though, was a different ballgame. Still, the age difference between him and Priscilla didn't bother Elvis, neither did the fact that she was still very much a minor. As it turned out, Elvis believed he could mold Priscilla into the perfect woman for him by teaching her how to love and respect him while she was much younger. Some might say this was a bit predatory, but hey, these were the times, I guess.
You know, you were with him when you became a young woman, you married him, and you were only with him for 6 years, man and wife.
No, but we were together way before that. I was with him, married at 21 and on.
In May of 1967, Elvis and Priscilla eventually tied the knot at a ceremony in Vegas. He was 32 at the time, while she was just a few weeks shy of her 22nd birthday. Now, it is worth noting that the two reportedly never slept together until their wedding night. Still, this only marks one detail in the many convoluted complexities that would come to mark their marriage. For one, the wedding between Elvis and Priscilla was a huge event carefully curated to hide any details about their prior relationship. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was known to be very controlling, and he worked his back out to make sure that everything about the two was as perfect as possible, especially to the press and the general public. The goal here was to maintain an image that was as near perfect as possible. Details that might have cast a negative image on their relationship, from the nature of their early years to the dynamics of their personal life, were conveniently glossed over and shielded from public consumption. Still, their marriage was definitely far from perfect. Like I said earlier, Elvis and Priscilla didn't have intimate relations until their wedding night, and the moment they did, Priscilla got pregnant. As it turned out, Elvis asked for a trial separation immediately after he found out that Priscilla was carrying a baby. Their daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, was born in 1968, exactly 9 months after the couple's wedding. As Priscilla would eventually divulge, Elvis became very reluctant to be intimate with her following HR childbirth. He had initially played it as him just wanting her to recover from the rigors of pregnancy, but as time went on, she discovered that he was physically unable to make love to a woman who had given birth. This was despite the fact that he had several extramarital affairs. This wasn't the only issue with their marriage, though. As time went on, Priscilla wanted more independence from her husband. She realized that her life had become his life and that she didn't have an identity of her own. Couple that with the fact that they hadn't been in a while, and it's easy to see why their marriage only lasted until 1973. As time has passed, society has had time to really explore and examine the intricacies of the relationship between Elvis and Priscilla, particularly the dynamics between them in their early years. And the more we see, the more we understand why many people in Elvis's camp tried to create a crafted image of their love life, even though that wasn't necessarily the case. The death of Marilyn Monroe. Today, Hollywood has churned out several leading ladies who have gone on to shake the entertainment industry to its core. These women, often called bombshells or sex symbols, are the epitome of feminine beauty. That said, it should also be mentioned that they have made it to the top of the entertainment industry off the back of their talent and hard work, even though their looks have also definitely given them an added advantage. That said, there's a solid argument to be made that no other woman paved the way for the modern-day Hollywood bombshell like Marilyn Monroe. In her heyday, Marilyn was undoubtedly the most sought-after woman in all of Hollywood. Talented and drop-dead gorgeous, this actress, singer, and model was the envy and desire of many, and even she knew it. Despite having a career that was hugely successful, however, Marilyn was also the subject of controversy after controversy. And on August 5th, 1962, it all came crashing down after she was found dead in her Brentwood, California home.
One of the most famous stars in Hollywood history is dead at 36. Marilyn Monroe was found dead.
Marilyn's death was ruled dose. A toxicology report found that she had ingested a lethal dose of butyl, a drug used to treat anxiety, as well as a large dose of a sedative drug called Despite Marilyn's death being ruled an overdose, however, several conspiracy theories have surrounded her passing and fostered theories that there was some foul play involved. Primarily, it was eventually rumored after Marilyn's death that she had been having an affair with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. In fact, some even claim that the former AG visited her on the night of her passing. The claims of foul play involved were so intense that the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office eventually reopened an investigation into her death in 1982, a full 20 years after Marilyn had passed. After extensive investigations, it was discovered that Marilyn had indeed overdosed on these substances, although it remained inconclusive whether this was a deliberate effort or just a mistake made by her physicians. Still, the theorists weren't satisfied. In 1985, a woman claimed that Marilyn's ex-husband, actor Peter Lawford, had gone to her house the night she died and destroyed a note in which the distraught actress blamed President Kennedy for her death. Still, all of this is just hearsay that can't be proven in court. At the end of the day, there will always be those who believe that Marilyn's death was more than meets the eye. And for these people, it appears that no amount of proof can be enough to clear their suspicions. Still, the rumors of her affairs with several notable men, including and especially the Kennedys, always make for salacious content. The Houdini Sucker Punch. It's difficult to find a person whose talent has transcended an industry quite like Harry Houdini did when it came to magic. Think about it. In every facet of entertainment and show business, you can kind of argue that the most impressive talents are people who performed relatively recently. For magic, however, one name stands firmly above the rest: Harry Houdini. Despite the fact that he died almost a century ago, Houdini remains the GOAT of magicians, and to be fair, the distance is still pretty far. His penchant for death-defying stunts and magic tricks made him a household name, although unbeknownst to many people, Houdini made just as lasting an impact off the stage. Detailing Houdini's early life and rise to fame would pretty much be a waste of time. The entire entertainment industry is well familiar with that. However, by the turn of the 1920s, this man had become such a household name that ignoring him was practically impossible. With his popular one-man shows selling out tickets across the United States, Harry was one of the most popular men in the world. The problem, however, was that Houdini had also become quite controversial. Primarily, there was a growing spiritualist movement that had swept across the country, a movement that looked to ban several activities within the country, including magic and fortune-telling. By 1926, a 52-year-old Houdini was still very much active in the entertainment scene. He couldn't give up performing for anything, not even his safety. So he went on yet another successful tour, albeit one fraught with several unfortunate events, from his wife's illness to his suffering a broken toe while performing a difficult trick. Houdini was put through the crucible. Still, the show went on. At the same time, Houdini had rallied against the spiritualist movement in Congress. He very clearly angered these spiritualists, and instead of giving in to their demands, he doubled down on his position. One fateful day, Houdini concluded a lecture at McGill University where he spoke about the harmful effects of spiritualism. He was in his dressing room preparing for his next tour stop when he met a group of medical students who were his fans. After speaking to them for a bit, one of the students decided to test the theory of Houdini's great strength. At the time, Houdini had been known for his ability to take physical contact without showing pain. So this student caught the magician off guard, punishing him several times in the gut. Unable to brace for impact, Houdini felt very physically hurt. He went on to perform that night, but he complained about stomach cramps. The next day, Houdini was in severe abdominal pain and even had a fever of 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite this discomfort, the resilient magician traveled 15 hours via train to Detroit for his next show. He was examined by a doctor who recommended that he visit the hospital, but Houdini refused. Per usual, the show went on, but this time there was something off. Audience members reported that the magician rushed through the show, and by the third act, he couldn't go on. The show ended abruptly, and as soon as the curtains fell, Houdini collapsed where he stood. He eventually agreed to go to the hospital, but at this point, it was too late. Houdini was diagnosed with a ruptured appendix and with no antibiotic treatments. This was pretty much a death sentence. 6 days later, Houdini passed away. Doctors listed Houdini's death as periodontitis caused by a burst appendix. At the time, it was accepted that the punch Houdini took to the gut caused his appendicitis and indirectly his death. However, some believe that spiritualists might have had something to do with it. In their book, The Secret Life of Houdini, authors William Kalush and Larry Sloman explained that the spiritualists weren't above murder and had even poisoned some of their enemies in the past. They also pointed out that an official autopsy was never carried out on the magician's body, furthering their claim that someone could have poisoned him without being caught. Disney's Nazi connection. In the earliest years of Hollywood, the entire entertainment industry worked to steer clear of any political overtones. At the time, it appeared that Hollywood was really only focused on one thing: making movies. Actors could come to Hollywood regardless of their political inclinations and make a name for themselves, and this went on for decades. However, all of this changed when World War II began to loom. At the start of the war, America had remained neutral. However, this didn't mean there weren't some very strong voices regarding the war. In November 1938, a German filmmaker, Leni Riefenstahl, landed in New York with a simple mission to promote Olympia, an epic documentary covering the 1939 Berlin Olympics. At this point, Riefenstahl had gained massive popularity in Germany, and she even helped create a Nazi propaganda film in 1935 called Triumph of the Will. There was no hiding the fact that Riefenstahl was a filmmaker who was loved by the Nazi Party, and her visit to the United States came just shortly after the infamous Night of Broken Glass, a wave of anti-Semitic violence in Nazi Germany coordinated by the Nazi Party. Seeing everything that had gone on in Germany, Hollywood had a very strong stance of being anti-Nazi. So, when Riefenstahl came to town, the sentiment towards her was pretty cold. Every single movie studio boycotted the filmmaker, refusing to show Olympia and basically giving her the cold shoulder. Due to her association with the Nazi regime, many in Hollywood chose not to give her an audience. But there was one major Hollywood player who broke this boycott, none other than Walt Disney himself. According to reports, Disney gave Riefenstahl a tour of his film studio and even showed her the storyboards to Fantasia, a musical anthology being developed by the studio that would come out in 1940. At the time, Disney's decision to accommodate Riefenstahl wasn't well publicized. In fact, the studio did all it could to keep that fact under wraps for a very long time. Despite the fact that America hadn't been involved in the war yet, opposition to the Nazi cause had been strong in the United States, and Disney was well aware that if this information ever got out, it would have been a pretty bad look. Now, it should be noted that Disney balked when Riefenstahl presented the opportunity to screen Olympia. I mean, the man knew he had business in the United States, so he couldn't cross that line. Still, you can imagine why he would want to hide the fact that he even met with the filmmaker in the first place. James Dean's tragic engagement. Hollywood is no stranger to love stories, and the biggest stars in the industry have had a long history of hitching up and getting coupled up. Sadly, for every successful Hollywood love story you see today, there are countless other couples that couldn't have their own happily ever after. In the 50s, we got a perfect example of this. James Dean, a handsome, broodingly lanky 23-year-old, was already considered a top star to watch, and Anna Maria Pierangeli, an Italian actress who had come to America seeking stardom, was also on the rise. The two were a match made in heaven, and when they met in 1954 while filming the epic movie The Silver Chalice, sparks flew immediately. James and Maria were Hollywood's new it couple. However, even though the paparazzi already knew they were an item, they decided to still try to keep things down low. This low-key relationship continued until November 1954, when James asked Maria to marry him. Smitten by her leading man, she instinctively said yes. Hollywood now had a wedding to plan, or so they thought. As it turned out, this relationship was one that faced several obstacles. The most prominent of these obstacles was none other than Maria's mother/manager, Enrica. A no-nonsense professional, Enrica had also brought Maria's twin sister to Hollywood, and she was determined to keep her daughters away from any romances that could ruin their reputations. Naturally, Enrica was skeptical about James. For one, he was the quintessential Hollywood bad boy.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
Besides the looks, he had also had several flings in the past. Enrica perceived James as being ill-mannered and untidy, And to make things worse, she, a devout Catholic, couldn't stand the fact that he was an atheist. To his credit, James tried everything to win Enrica over. He dressed up nicely during visits and even cleaned up his act whenever he was with Maria. Still, Enrica wouldn't budge, and a mere 2 days after breaking the news of their engagement to her mother, Maria returned to James, reneging on her acceptance and even telling him that they couldn't see each other again. To add insult to injury, that same month, Maria would announce that she'd be marrying the singer Vic Damone, an Italian-American who was also a Catholic. Yeah, you can imagine how devastated James would have been. James would go on to have other short affairs, but on September 30th, 1955, just 7 months after his breakup with Maria, he died in Chalmette, California, from injuries sustained during an accident involving his Porsche 550 Spider at the age of 24. According to legend, in the glove compartment of his wrecked car was a new letter in which he yet again asked Pierangeli to marry him. Sadly, he never got the chance to give the letter to her. The mystery of Paul Bern's death. Hollywood has had its fair share of weird, mysterious deaths over the years, and for many of these deaths, the details being shared about them over time lend some credence to the fact that there is surely more to them than meets the eye. The death of Paul Bern easily fits into this mold. Now, if you don't know Paul Bern, it's okay. Instead of being a big actor or musician, he was actually a studio executive. Born in 1889, Paul moved to the United States when he was just a boy and quickly realized that he had the potential to be in the film business. Now, although he initially pursued a career in stage acting, he soon realized that his aptitude for acting was low, so he pursued other aspects of filmmaking. After a stint as a stage manager and a film editor, Paul eventually worked his way up to scenario writing and became a director. This led to him becoming a producer and studio executive at MGM, where he really made his mark. While Paul was doing pretty well professionally, his personal life was a bit of a mess though. He fell in love with actress Barbara Lamar in the 20s, but sadly, he found that she didn't reciprocate his feelings. Then, at the premiere of one of his movies in 1930, he met actress Jean Harlow. At this time, Jean had built a bit of a notorious reputation in Hollywood for always wanting to be in the spotlight. Still, despite this notoriety, Paul fell in love with her. He was instrumental in helping to develop her career, and over time, they both developed a friendship and started dating. In July 1932, Paul and Jean tied the knot. As you'd imagine, the relationship between Paul and Jean was all but perfect. He notoriously had an affair with his secretary while married, and some believe that Jean cheated on his plenty as well. And for many who knew them intimately, the couple appeared to hop from one fight to the other. Well, the marriage between Paul and Jean was a very short one. On September 5th, 1932, barely 2 months after marrying his bride, Paul was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head at the couple's home in Beverly Hills. When they arrived at the scene, police claimed to have seen a note which read, "Dearest dear, unfortunately this is the only way to make good the frightful wrong I have done you and to wipe out my abject humiliation. I love you, Paul. You understand that last night was only a comedy." Speaking to the authorities, Jean claimed that she knew nothing about Paul's death. She was made an executor of her husband's estate, and interestingly, she never spoke of his death publicly until her death 5 years later. Now, although the official story was that Paul killed himself, many have disputed that fact. For one, it is said that the top brass at MGM, including studio head Louis B. Mayer, had arrived at the scene of his death before the police and taken away incriminating evidence. As it turned out, Jean was working with MGM at the time, most likely due to Paul's influence at the studio, and as you'd imagine, the studio would definitely not want anything to tarnish the name of one of its assets. This theory was supported by Ben Hecht, a notable screenwriter who said in the November 1960 issue of Playboy that he believed foul play was involved here. According to Hecht, the entire fiasco was no more than a whitewash organized by the top brass at MGM to protect Jean. Hecht's article prompted the LA County District Attorney to reopen the investigation into Paul's death, although the investigation was later closed again on the grounds of insufficient evidence. Nevertheless, there have been several theories as to what really happened here and how Paul's demise really went down. Prince's tragic child story. When it comes to musicians and their impacts on today's sound, it is almost impossible to think of anyone who had the type of sway that Prince had. I mean, sure, there are always those who believe that Michael Jackson was the more influential and successful artist, but when it came to protecting the purity and authenticity of his sound, trust me, hardly anyone could match the versatility of Prince. The Purple Rain singer was an inspiration to many who loved and adored his sound. However, there is a saying that all geniuses are doomed to suffer in some way or the other. And when it came to Prince, there was just no way to separate the man from his many demons. For one, Prince fell into the same trap that ensnared many musical geniuses, a rift with his record label that affected his ability to make music. I mean, it even got so bad to the point where the artist literally had to change his name.
I mean, did you think of a name? What is your name at birth?
My name at birth was Prince Rogers Nelson.
So, did you think of Nelson?
No.
Rogers?
No.
Were you thinking of a name?
No, it didn't come to me like that. Mainly the media's problem with not having a pronunciation for the symbol, so they had to come up with something, I guess.
There were also things like the singer's alleged issues with substances and so much more. However, perhaps the most interesting scandal related to Prince involved his only child. You see, all through his career, Prince was linked to several women, from Kim Basinger and Carmen Electra to Madonna and Sherilyn Fenn. However, one day in 1990, he saw a dancer named Mayte Garcia standing outside his tour bus and immediately referred to her as his future wife. Garcia began working as one of his backup singers, and the two soon struck up a relationship. On Valentine's Day in 1996, Prince and Garcia finally got married. He was 37 at the time, while she was just about 22. Like all whirlwind romances, the marriage between Prince and Garcia got off to an exciting start. In fact, she got pregnant just shortly after the two tied the knot. Sadly, this pregnancy would never get to term. For one, Prince and Garcia were apparently focused on raising their family away from public attention. So, they didn't make the news of this pregnancy public. To make things worse, the couple's baby boy, who was later found to have been named Boy Gregory, died just a week after his birth due to Pfeiffer syndrome, an incredibly rare congenital disability that affects the skull, face, and head. The couple, particularly Prince, didn't exactly take this loss well. Still, weirdly, just within days of losing their son, the couple went on the Oprah Winfrey Show and pretended he was still alive. They even gave a tour of his playroom, but the little boy was nowhere to be found. This wasn't the end, though. According to reports, Garcia suffered a miscarriage when she got pregnant again about a year later. In many ways, this was pretty much the death knell for their relationship. Prince and Garcia continued to drift apart, and just 4 years after they exchanged vows, they decided to go their separate ways. Speaking on the effects of losing two kids, Garcia later told news sources that she believed this was what drove a wedge between her and the iconic singer. To lose two babies is really scary. It really caught on me emotionally, physically, everything. It took me at least 15 years to get over it, and still, to this day, I miss my son. To be fair, it's understandable that Prince and his handlers tried their best to keep this whole saga a secret. Losing one child can be devastating, but losing two is just a level of pain that I wouldn't wish on anyone. People have their way of processing grief, and I guess this was just their method. Michael Jackson's skin tone. On our final note, we'll look at a man who was the only one who could pretty much rival Prince when it came to artistic prowess and ingenuity. They say that Prince was, well, the Prince of Pop. Well, who was the king? Michael Jackson himself. From a young age, Michael had been destined for greatness. As a member of the Jackson 5, he displayed flashes of what would be a brilliant musical career, seemingly becoming the band's frontman despite being the second youngest of the bunch. As soon as Michael's talent became known, he had everyone at his beck and call. And once the Jackson 5 broke up and he went solo, his career went on an absolute rocket ship. In no time, Michael was racking up platinum records and selling out arenas everywhere. His music was touching lives in ways that absolutely no one could imagine, and his career seemed to reach one peak after the other. Michael was the man now, and even towards the farthest reaches of the earth, his music resonated with millions. However, while Michael appeared to be on top of the world, he was harboring a pretty troubling secret. Somewhere in the mid-80s, the singer had been diagnosed with vitiligo, a skin condition that causes pigmentation in different parts of the body. Today, vitiligo is a pretty common condition, and there is more knowledge about it. People who have the condition understand that it isn't a death sentence, and the body positivity message being shared over the past decade or so has meant that more people with vitiligo have become more comfortable in their own skin. Literally. For Michael, a black famous man in the 80s, this wasn't necessarily the case. As a youth, Mike was medium brown. However, towards the mid-80s, fans began to notice that his skin tone started to change, he grew considerably paler, and soon enough he had pretty much become a white man. Fans obviously took notice of this, and the rumor mill churned for years and years to come. The most prominent rumor was that he had gone under the knife to change his skin tone, while some even believed that what we could see was no more than a clone of Michael after the real Mike had died. In fact, some African-American psychologists had argued that Mike began bleaching his skin so that he could appeal to a broader audience of people and make his music more acceptable to a more mainstream audience. Mike was criticized for giving black youth a feeling that they had to be esoteric and idiosyncratic to be successful. Others claimed that he and other black celebrities were trying to look more like white people so they could get in movies and television. Even some who had been in Mike's camp believed that there was something else going on. But the characteristically quiet Mike never spoke much about it. It wasn't until 1993 that Mike eventually came out to explain what was going on. In an interview with Oprah, he explained that he had been diagnosed with vitiligo almost a decade ago and that he had used fair-looking makeup to even out his skin tone.
There, as I know of, there is no such thing as skin bleaching. I have never seen it. I don't know what it is.
Well, they used to have those.
And I have a skin disorder that destroys the pigmentation of the skin. It's something that I cannot help. When people make up stories that I don't want to be who I am, it hurts me.
If you're a fan of Mike, you'd know that this wasn't the only controversy surrounding him. Still, this was definitely the most outrageous of them all. Hollywood and scandals will always be synonymous, and even today, we're seeing more proof that there will always be fodder for drama enthusiasts to consume. Still, I'd love to know your thoughts. Did you find any of these details juicy? Let us know in the comments.